Hi, this is Craig from RSA, and today we're going to be talking about taking authentication to the next level with our new capabilities with the SecurID Access Cloud Authentication Service and the classic on-premise Authentication Manager appliance. Really taking it to the next level in terms of modern authentication, automatic patching, conditional access, and really lowering the total cost of ownership for authentication in your organization. And one of the aspects here is around the classic capability that is housed within something called Authentication Manager, delivering classic on-premise classic tokens to a range of applications, whether they're VPN or privileged access applications or endpoints. One aspect to this story is that every single SecurID Access customer is automatically licensed for a cloud tenant. With the cloud service, it enables the ability to do modern MFA like push to approve, biometrics into cloud-protected applications, including third-party SSO providers. To make this journey a lot easier, with version 8.5 of Authentication Manager, we provided a baked-in component referred to as the identity router. This is normally a standalone virtual appliance, but we've taken a stripped-down variant of it and embedded it inside of the Authentication Manager appliance, which provides a conduit for your on-premise identities to be known to the Cloud Authentication Service. And as a result, you can do modern MFA to your existing fleet of protected resources with Authentication Manager without any changes whatsoever. And in reverse, you can use your existing token fleet to access or protect resources that are protected with the Cloud Authentication Service. And this also includes a range of agent technology for, say, Windows, Citrix Storefront, Linux, and Mac OS to do modern authentication to those endpoints as well. Now let's get started on how to get this running. What we have in front of us now is the RSA Security Console that many of our customers over the last 20 years are very used to. And this has now provided the ability for you to connect this Authentication Manager capability to the cloud through a hardened appliance called an identity router. There are a couple of assumptions to make before we make this journey. One is that you've been provided a SecurID Access Cloud tenant and have administrative credentials to get into it. And so assuming that has happened, and all SecurID customers have the ability to use this free of charge, we're going to start the process of enabling this on-prem capability through a secure proxy and the identity router. So the first step that we take in this journey is to visit our cloud tenant, and here's the administrative interface for that. Now this is not intended to be a comprehensive training video. This is really just 0 to hero in terms of, a generic way that you can make the magic happen. Now, whether you have an existing identity router in place or you're a fresh new customer, what I'm about to tell you has relevance. Because one of the fundamental features of version 8.5 is that it now has the ability to fail over authentication if the cloud service is unavailable or internet connectivity is disrupted. Assuming, of course, that I have Authentication Manager deployed somewhere, including in a public cloud if you want to, it has to be on version 8.5 to take advantage of this feature. And it's a one-step upgrade to 8.5 if you're on 8.2 SP1 or beyond. Just a single step to get into this functionality. And of course, you have to have a cloud tenant provided by RSA. The first port of call is really around if you have an identity router in place already performing functionality like baked-in radius or single sign-on, you'll need to create a new cluster with those features disabled. And it's fairly easy to do this with a one-button click here to enable or disable certain features. One of the core components of the embedded IDR is that it only synchronizes user identities. It does not provide inbuilt radius or single sign-on. You can have a standalone identity router for those aspects. What it does provide is that failover mechanism. So as you can see, I have a cluster defined aside from a standalone one called AM cluster, which is where I'm going to put the new identity router. So the first port of call is to actually establish this. And I'm going to connect my cloud service using the Authentication Manager option in the Cloud GUI. And one aspect is, if you're not familiar with any of the terms I use, definitely reach out to us because we'll be able to provide some basic education around this. And so one aspect is, we have assurance levels inside of an access policy. And the assurance levels really are just auth methods, low assurance auth methods like SMS, or a higher assurance one like a SecurID token. Well, when you have a policy aligned to Authentication Manager, you want to do modern MFA to existing agent integrations and radius. And so your assurance level must include one of the authentication methods held by the SecurID Authenticate Cloud MFA app. And one of them is Authenticate Token Code, and another one is Push to Approve, and another one is Phone-Based Biometrics. So as long as your assurance level includes one of those, then you need to align it with your connection to Auth Manager. The second thing is you need two pieces of information to register Authentication Manager through the embedded IDR into the cloud. And so you can click this magic Generate Code button and copy-paste these values into Authentication Manager. So assuming that you have done this, you can actually go to the security console of Authentication Manager. And let's do that. So here I am in front of the security console, and as you can see, I'm already connected, but the process is largely the same. It takes you through a wizard to configure this. And as you can see, there's a place for you to put in the registration code I mentioned earlier and the registration URL. You must do this as a first step to connecting Authentication Manager to the cloud. Once that is done, and you've got that magic green tick box that says it's happy, we need to define an identity router up in the cloud before we start to manage the baked-in one. So what I do is I go up to Platform, Identity Routers, and I add a new one. And it's asking me, where do we want to deploy this identity router? And of course, we're using the built-in one inside of Authentication Manager. And I can name it whatever I want, but I'm just going to call this AMIDR. And then I'm going to select the cluster that I had disabled SSO and Radius in. We're only using the identity sync or enterprise connector capability of the identity router. And now I get a special registration code that I need to copy and paste into the configuration screen for the identity router. And second, I'm going to need to know this authentication service domain. Really, it's just an endpoint that the IDR is going to need to talk to up in the cloud to service authentication. And once that's done, life is good. So I've copied the registration code, and I'll make a note of what the authentication service domain is. So as you can see, the Authentication Manager appliance is currently inactive because I haven't configured it yet. And so returning to the Authentication Manager security console, I can manage the inbuilt identity router. One aspect is I've already downloaded this identity router, which is really just a button that you would see here. And once it's downloaded, we need to configure it. And so I hit this magic button. And it is going to require some setup credentials. And those credentials are default right out of the appliance, and it'll expect you to change them right away. So my credential is IDR admin, and the password is S1P13. Leet speak for simple. And the first thing it's going to want me to do is change this password, which I'll do. So S1MP13, and then I'll define a new password. Sorry, I'm not going to tell you what it is. So once that's done, it's going to get you to log in again with this new password. Oop. And now I'm going to need what I copied earlier, which is the registration code and then the authentication service domain. The authentication service domain is provided for you in the screen that I showed you earlier, and you can copy-paste that value as well. If you have a proxy, even if it's an authenticated proxy, you can input it here. Now, once it's all as well, it's going to attempt to contact the registration service in the SecurID Cloud. It'll do a registration operation, it'll test it, and then it's going to do some additional checks in terms of authentication and your product maintenance. This will take just a couple of minutes and will return when it is complete. Okay, we get the magic green tick box that says everything is good. So now we can effectively close this out. And now you'll see another magic green tick box that says the identity router is enabled. So let's go back and check in again just to make sure. And it definitely is registered. It reflects the current time. And now we're basically ready to go. Now, as I said, this is not a comprehensive training video. I've connected Authentication Manager to my cloud tenant, and with the assumption that I have some protected application by Authentication Manager, we are now able to do modern MFA to that agent. Now there's a whole conversation around how to get MFA through our cloud-based self-service portal. And second is, if you have an existing user inside of Authentication Manager with a token, and then they suddenly register for MFA, they can actually just use their existing SecurID pin to authenticate to a resource. So let me show you what that pattern looks like. Now it's time to finally show all of this in action. On the left, you can see I have the real-time Authentication Monitor console open from Authentication Manager. Any request for authentication is going to show up in here in real time. In the middle window, I have a regular old SecurID agent for Windows, which is connected to Authentication Manager. And on the right, you can see the modern MFA app called SecurID Authenticate. Now, to get this started, I just log in as if I were a regular user with a regular token. And in this particular case, to provoke a push to approve, which is what I'm going to use, all I do is enter in my SecurID pin, all by itself. And once I've done that, an authentication request is going to be sent through Auth Manager up to the cloud, and then come back down to the app on the phone as a push to approve request. And as you can see on the right, that's happened. And it's showing my Win client as the agent that I need to respond to. So I've done that. And authentication has gone through. Put in my password, although you can turn on Windows password integration in this agent. And voila, I've logged in. And this is just an example of any type of agent or radius connected to Auth Manager to use modern MFA authentication. Now it's time to show you the offline case where internet connectivity is disrupted, or the rare event where the cloud service is down. Now Authentication Manager is more important because it contains that token code synchronization job to ensure that all your users can continue to authenticate even during an outage. The best that I can show you is a simulation of the cloud service being unavailable to Authentication Manager. And as you can see on the left here, I'm logged into the operations console of the SecurID appliance. So I head on over to Administration, Network, and edit the host file directly to replace the IP address of the authentication service endpoint in the cloud to something else. There it is. Save it out. And now instantly the cloud connection from Authentication Manager is now disrupted. And I'm going to prove to you that this actually still works. So I still have my good old Windows agent in the middle and the MFA app on the right. And I'm just going to use the app to reveal the token codes. So that's a built-in local biometric or PIN. And as you can see, the token codes are there. These are the token codes that are synced down inside of a cloud tenant that's connected to Auth Manager. And so when Craig tries to log into this Windows agent, 01533629, it'll still continue to work. And I've logged in, as you can see. And that's without a cloud connection being valid. It has literally evaluated this token code that has pulled down from the cloud. All right, we need to cap things off now, and I'd like to finish up by just showing you where to go for information on configuring this stuff. Obviously, this video is meant to serve as a guide, but I think it's best to see it in writing as a reference. As you can see, I've logged into the RSA Link community website, community.rsa.com. I've gone under Products to SecurID and hit the 8.5 landing page. And where do you go next? Obviously, all the documentation is here, but if you want that quick and handy guide, click on Configure the Embedded Identity Router, and it'll go through all of the requirements that I showed you during this video. And that's it from me. Thank you so much for your time and interest, or better yet, reach out to us if you have any questions. Thanks very much.